Divided Republicans nominate a new speaker, but can he pass the full House? Plus, what to do about the U.S. migrant crisis. Hello, I'm Mike Waller, sitting in for Anya Parampil, and this is The Heat. As one headline put it, House Republicans pick Steve Scalise as Speaker nominee, but it's unclear if he can get the votes to win the gavel. It's been an ongoing saga that has paralyzed the U.S. Congress ever since a minority of Republicans took the extraordinary step of ousting their own Speaker. This at a time of a mounting budget crisis and a record flow of migrants at the southern border and an upcoming presidential election. But we begin on Capitol Hill with CGTN's Nathan King. So, Nathan, a divided Republican caucus, they nominate their majority leader to be the next Speaker of the House, but this isn't over yet, is it?
Yeah, it's like a reality TV show here on Capitol Hill. One gets voted off the island, who gets voted on the island, choose your favourite show. But, I mean, the reality is that Steve Scalise, the number 2 of the now ousted Speaker Kevin McCarthy, was always going to be a front runner. What complicates things is that he has a cancer, blood cancer, and that has given some people a bit of reticence voting against him. But behind closed doors, he did get a vote of the majority of the Republican caucus, 113 votes to 99. But if you add those two together, the 99 were for Jim Jordan, the firebrand congressman from Ohio who founded the Freedom Caucus. If you add those two together, they still don't come to 217 votes. So the next stage is to go to the House floor and get a majority of the House. And as you know, it's a very, very slender majority. That's one of the reasons that Kevin McCarthy lost his speakership last week. Saying thank you to most of his colleagues, Steve Scalise said, let's get this House vote done soon. Let's take a listen.
Obviously, we still have work to do. We're going to have to go upstairs on the House floor and resolve this and then get the House opened again. We have a lot of work to do, not just in the House for the people of this country, but we see how dangerous of a world it is and how things can change so quickly.
Yeah, you're talking about a dangerous world. Remember, Ukraine aid was not included in the resolution that kept the government open for 45 days, and that is now below 40 days. And then, of course, there's the crisis in the Middle East and all other sorts of things that Republicans are going to have to deal with. But the reason they didn't have a vote today, Wednesday, is because he didn't have the votes. And it's not clear whether they'll have the votes tomorrow. And it's not just the usual holdouts, the right-wing firebrands backed by Donald Trump. Matt Gaetz, remember that bomb-throwing senator from congressman from Florida? He actually wants Scalise. A lot of people who did deals with McCarthy now want the same deals from Scalise. He may not be able to guarantee it. So it's still a bit of a mess. But the hope is, because of the crisis internationally and domestically, cooler heads will prevail. But we're talking about the Republican Party of 2023, aren't we?
Well, let's stick with your island metaphor. He's not wanting to be voted off the island. He wants to stay on the island. If he does become Speaker, what can we expect in terms of priorities? What are they likely to be? And can he actually reach across the aisle and get support from some Democrats?
It may shock you, Mike, but this guy is not a middle-of-the-road Republican. He is from Louisiana, a very oil-rich district. He once said he was like David Duke. Remember the former Klansman, KKK, but without the baggage. He's extremely right-wing. And I don't think reaching over the aisle is going to be one of his priorities. But uniting the Republican Party so that they don't vote him out if he does something they don't like, and keeping the government open, and also this deal with Ukraine and aid, which is getting so much pressure from the Senate, the White House. They were meant to supply $24 billion, and then we've got Israel on top, because there's going to have to be money for them as well, is really going to put pressure on this guy. I don't see, if we don't get a vote tomorrow, how there couldn't be another candidate. I mean, this is by no means guaranteed.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about that. Thanks so much, Nathan. That's CGTN's Nathan King reporting from Capitol Hill. There's much to talk about. Let's get right to our panel. Anya Parampil is a journalist with the Grayzone and author of the forthcoming book, Corporate Coup, Venezuela, and the End of the U.S. Empire. Also with us here on the set, Adolfo Franco. He's an attorney and Republican strategist. And Eleanor Clift is a political columnist with the Daily Beast. And Eleanor, we're going to start with you. Scalise gets the nod, but as we pointed out, 99 of his colleagues went for the Ohio Republican Jim Jordan. Obviously, it's a Republican caucus that's divided. Let me get your thoughts. He has to get to 217. He can only afford to lose 4 Republicans. Obviously, he didn't bring a vote up today, which is not a great sign. Where do you see things?
Well, there are 221 Republicans, and not everybody voted in the numbers that we saw today. His main competitor, Jim Jordan, said that he would give a nominating speech for Scalise, and he's supporting him. But there are different cliques, and not everybody has made up their mind that they want to vote for Scalise. And as Nathan pointed out, they want to see what kind of deals they can make. So that's going to be going on in the next day or so. If he can't get to 217, they don't want to go to the floor and risk the embarrassment of vote after vote after vote. Remembering it took 15 ballots to install McCarthy as the first speaker. They don't want to go through that again. So it could open the door for a so-called compromise candidate, the Speaker pro tem, North Carolina Republican Patrick McHenry, who's famous mostly for wearing a bow tie. He's kind of been auditioning for the role. They could tap him. And then there's Tom Cole from Oklahoma, who's respected on both sides of the aisle, a former political consultant. He's kind of a grown-up. So I think there are other options. But it's embarrassing that the world is on fire, and they can't figure out among themselves who they want to install in the House. And the House, according to the Constitution, can't function without a speaker. They're now talking about, well, maybe they'll have to change some rules so that they can get funding to Israel. But I think that's a desperation method. I think we should just be grateful that they're trying to settle this among themselves before they put the whole country through watching them try to come up with the votes.
So, Adolfo, will the Republicans coalesce around Scalise? And I know you mentioned you thought he was going to get the nod here. There's so many factions within the party right now. How does he bring them together? How does he get to that magic number of 217?
Well, I think it's going to be Speaker Scalise, and I've thought that for some time.
But is it going to be Speaker Scalise tomorrow or the next day? Or I mean, how long is this going to go?
I think in short order, but I think what's being debated, with all due respect, is not the individuals. I think when Eleanor's correct, when Jim Jordan, who was a viable candidate, this was a contest between the two of them that's been really settled. By the conference. Once that is settled and Jordan actually supports Scalise, the holdouts are not a holdout over another candidate. I don't believe any of the other candidates mentioned are because people want Congressman Cole to be the speaker. They want concessions. And they want a role. But concessions means how the Rules Committee, again, might be, the composition might be changed, the motion to vacate, to remove the speaker, and so forth, their larger role. And of course, the big question is government spending and what that means when the government runs out of money in less than 40 days. What's the position of the caucus going to be and the speaker to be going to be on the spending issues? And aid to Ukraine, for example, which has been an issue with a lot of conservative members. So that's what's going on behind the scenes. It's not really personalities, it's who can deliver on these concessions, who is willing to make those concessions. Obviously, the 15 rounds that we saw last go around weren't 15 rounds of people casting 15 until the magic number. The reason those numbers changed at the end is because Kevin McCarthy made concessions to get to the number he needed, the 217 or 218 at that time. So that's what's going on behind the scenes. But with Jordan out of it, it's probably...
Let me just interrupt for just a second, because Matt Gaetz, one of his complaints leading up to this vote, and one of the reasons why he said he did this, is that McCarthy reneged on some of these concessions that he made. And it was a laundry list. Aren't you kind of handicapped as a speaker if you make all these concessions to all these different disparate groups?
Oh, no question. And we were on this program in the past, and I have believed Kevin McCarthy would be the speaker, but I believed at the time, and I said it on this program, he'd be a short-lived speaker. I think he wanted that prize. He worked for it very hard. However, you cannot, in the numbers that we have in the House, Republicans have in the House, you can't simply say, I'm not going to make any concessions, because then you won't get to that number. And if it gets to that level of chaos, then you will end up with a coalition with Democrats and then power sharing, which is going to be very, very chaotic for the Republican Party. So the only solution is Steve Scalise, with some arrangements that are made, that are yet to be determined, for him to have the gavel and certainly make some pronouncements on particularly government spending on the key things that brought in Ukraine, that brought Kevin McCarthy down. But you're absolutely right. This is the problem when you have a 4-seat majority and you have a faction that is very, very populist and not in sync with 95 to 97% of the Republican Party in the House.
Anya, what do you make of what's been happening in the House of Representatives?
It's funny, I heard certain mainstream political commentators, especially from the Democratic Party, describe Matt Gaetz as a dog chasing a prize, or, you know, catching a prize and not knowing what to do with it. And I kind of feel as though that would be maybe the position that Steve Scalise would be in once he were actually in the speakership, similar to McCarthy. The figures that want to be the figurehead or are so concerned with their career in that way, I think are destined at this point in the Republican Party, which is really in flux and crisis, constantly in motion. You're signing up to have a short-lived career, but at least say that you did it, you became the speaker. Yeah. Whereas Gaetz and the Freedom Caucus wing are far more focused on building a long-term program and agenda. I'm not sure they necessarily are prepared to seize power themselves or want it. They're in a very good position right now where they are able to throw their weight around, make concrete demands from the party leadership, and also, when the time comes, build a platform and an agenda. And Gaetz already did this during the effort to oust McCarthy when he made the case about single issue voting, not having these huge, massive budgets. And I think those are actually positive proposals for American democracy, regardless of which party you're on. So that's interesting. And then it also exposed in another way how the progressive so-called wing of the Democratic Party really failed when they had the chance to make similar demands from Nancy Pelosi when she was speaker. They could have pressured her, thrown their power around, and demanded votes on issues like healthcare and other issues that they put at the forefront of their progressive agenda, and yet they didn't do it. So it's an interesting period of American politics.
It's definitely interesting, no doubt about it. I'd like to invite Joseph Williams into the conversation. We were hoping to have him at the top of the show, but he was stuck in the metro, so that may be an issue for the Congress to address. He's a former senior editor with U.S. News and World Report. Joseph, extraordinary time we're seeing this political chaos, but a quarter of Republicans say they approve of the decision by a small group of Republicans to remove Kevin McCarthy as the speaker. 3 in 10 Republicans believe it was a mistake, though. That's according to a poll from the Associated Press and the National Opinion Research Center in Chicago. Jim Jordan is saying he wants to support Scalise, but what do you make of all of this?
I think that the largest shadow that's being cast over the Republican Party right now, and a leading cause of this dysfunction, is one Donald J. Trump. I mean, he's clearly the elephant in the room, because the people that are trying to vie for the speakership and the one who lost the speakership were pretty much doing so trying to appease him. And he's created this position in the Republican Party where compromise is anathema, right? If you compromise with the Democrats, you're dead. But the system of government that we have is built on compromise. We're supposed to compromise. We're supposed to find common ground. Now, many will say that the same is true when Democrats are in power, but at least there's a realistic thread running through there that the Democrats know that certain functions of the government have to happen. Republicans, particularly you have extremists like Matt Gaetz and his ilk who want to make the point of shutting down government. Now, Scalise may be a compromise candidate. He may be able to work with Democrats, we'll see, but he's still got to answer to the right flank. And the same people that removed Kevin McCarthy from power are still in power. So that unless they change the rule, they're going to be able to do the same thing on Scalise. They're going to be able to put pressure on him. And I think that the fever has still not broken. And the only way it breaks is if Donald Trump is no longer on the political scene and no longer wields the kind of influence on Capitol Hill that allows people to pledge fealty to him and disrupt the entire function of government.
Adolfo, let me ask you, kind of to Joseph's point. I saw Representative Mike Lawler, who won a Biden district in New York, more of a moderate, but he was on TV shortly after this vote, said he did not vote for Scalise, he did not vote for Jordan, and primarily because neither one of them had a plan on how to basically deal with this fringe element of his party. And he said, you know, he said the Republicans need to work together as a team, and the majority has been disregarded. He kind of feels like a large part of the caucus kind of takes a backseat to these gentlemen. And when you look at what happened to McCarthy, we saw it with Speaker Ryan, we saw it with Speaker Boehner, where there's a small element that can really wreak havoc. Is there anything, I mean, you're a Republican strategist. I mean, what kind of suggestion would you make to Scalise in terms of how do you neutralize just a small group that's able to wreak havoc?
Well, you threaten that you're going to govern with the Democrats. That's the only way to do it.
But that's kind of not a winner with
Well,
Republicans.
but that's the new reality. You know, I go back a long time. I worked in the House 20 years ago. There was a party discipline that has broken down in both parties, but more in the Republican Party and since the Tea Party in 2010. I thought Joseph was going to blame the Metro on President Trump. They seem to blame everything on President Trump. This isn't about President Trump. The vast majority of Republicans share President Trump's policy views and share President Trump's agenda. Joseph might not, but the vast majority of Republicans do. The problem is this: there is a number. I do agree with almost everything that the guests have said. There's a small number. There are multiple. They're not really a Republican Party as we're thinking about it. There are 2 or 3 factions. The establishment Republican Party is a minority within the so-called 221. So the only way to do this moving forward, you're asking about Speaker Scalise, is you can't, you mentioned Lauer and others, you can't ignore 20 Republicans that are in Biden leading districts. You just cannot ignore them, nor will they be ignored. So to the other guests who had a very good presentation, which you were saying about the Gates agenda and moving it forward, and the Democrats didn't do it. The problem is Matt Gaetz' agenda and the Freedom Caucus agenda is not the majority view, and they will never be able to have their candidate, if you will, in the speakership. All this translates into one thing. We either come together with the majority, what Laura has said, the majority has said, we used to have a rule in the House, the majority of the conference is what dictates, or we turn to centrist Democrats to run the House of Representatives. At the end of the day, at some point, the government will be funded and things need to be moved forward with or without the 8 or 10 or 15 Republicans that will oppose any stopgap measure.
All right, Eleanor, let me ask you about the Trump endorsements. He threw his support behind Jim Jordan. Of course, he only got less than 100 votes. He tried to help Republicans flip the Senate, and of course we know he famously came out in support of Herschel Walker, Blake Masters, Adam Laxalt, Mehmet Oz, all in battleground states. All of them lost. What does this say about the Trump endorsement and the MAGA movement? Does it say anything at all?
Well, he also said he was going to visit Capitol Hill and throw his support behind Jim Jordan. He hasn't shown up yet. I think his endorsement is the kiss of death in some situations, but he still maintains a very strong hold on the Republican Party, and part of it is it's our electoral system, and the voters that stick with him. Non-college working white people mainly in industrial states in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And those are the states that decided the 2016 election and the 2020 election and are going to decide this election in 2024. So he had, I think his endorsement, as I said, is the kiss of death in some places. And Mitch McConnell, who's overseeing the Senate candidates for 2024, is trying mightily to get candidates that are not Trump affiliated. But what's going on in the House, it's not Matt Gaetz thinks Steve Scalise is fine. There are now other objectors have popped up, and I agree, they're all looking for concessions. But Ken Buck, who's a conservative from, I guess, Colorado, he said that Scalise and Jordan, too, wouldn't answer the question of whether the 2020 election was decided legitimately and Biden is the legitimate president. So these are very conservative people, and Trump is still they're his voice on Capitol Hill, and they want disruption because the more disruption they can bring about, that makes Biden look bad, and Trump is focused on the presidential race, and he has a path to win. I take him very seriously.
Well, Anya, let me ask you about an issue that Republicans are likely, once they get this all settled, to glom onto, and that's, of course, the issue of immigration, illegal migration. President Biden, just 4 months ago, was heralding how things were going well. Now they're not going so great, and in many cases, he's embracing a growing number of policies that Trump advocated. One, of course, being a border wall. Let's listen to what he had to say about that.
The border wall, the money was appropriated for the border wall. I tried to get them to reappropriate, to redirect that money. They didn't, they wouldn't. And in the meantime, there's nothing under the law other than they have to use the money for what it was appropriated. I can't stop that.
So he seems to be coming to the border wall rather reluctantly. What should the Biden administration be doing about this issue?
Regardless of where you fall on the bipartisan spectrum, there's no denying that whatever is going on at the southern U.S. border is an abject humanitarian catastrophe. It's not something that anyone should celebrate. As much as we like to hear or think of these stories about heroic people making a journey just to have a better life, that is not something I wish upon anyone. And the life that they have here once they arrive is not very good. They're going to be working tough jobs, and having spent a lot of time in the region, meaning south of the border, particularly in countries that have been the targets of U.S. sanction policy, particularly Venezuela, Nicaragua, for example. And now we're seeing that the people arriving at the border are not only coming from the Americas, but from all over the world. And in many cases, and similarly during the refugee crisis in Europe over the past decade, the people that are coming to the West are coming from countries that the West has actively destabilized, actively waged war upon, in the case of Afghanistan, Syria. In the Americas, that has looked like a hybrid war with sanctions and covert destabilization campaigns. So any American president who wants to address the crisis on the border should begin with the cause, which is our own policy, and reflect and draw back and start to have a positive and engaging relationship with the world and the region, stop destabilizing it. And when it comes to immigration itself, I mean, there needs to be some sort of, as with many issues, some sort of open conversation with the American people where we have some discussion about what is really going on here. I think those are the voices, the Americans and the migrants themselves, that get left out of the political back and forth the most.
Adolfo, obviously, Republicans are going to seize on this as an issue. Scalise, undoubtedly, when he becomes Speaker, if he becomes Speaker, this will be something that he'll... But is this something where he can reach across the aisle, where centrist Democrats... Is this an issue that affects all of America? And I think across the political spectrum, people would like something done about this.
Well, it's starting to, because it's costing the Democrats mighty heavily in the polls, and it's going to be at the top. Right now, it's the economy followed by immigration as the top concerns in the border. I'm not going to get into the philosophy here very much. I'll talk about the politics and the philosophy briefly that was just described. Here's the politics of it, to answer your question directly. You should run the clip here on the heat, August 20th, August 2020, when President Biden said that he would not construct one more foot of border wall. And now he's doing the opposite. He's reversed his policy. He's waiving 26 laws, federal laws, to get the so-called wall that he was mandated to build built. He could stop the wall very easily, as he has for the last 3 years. So this is a reversal. The reversal is why. The polling shows it. It's out of control. It isn't just a humanitarian crisis, I agree. It's a national security crisis. We're losing control of our border. It's a drug, it's cartel, it's violence. And now it's affecting U.S. cities. New York City, Chicago, all the mayors and the governors are clamoring for this administration to change the policy, ironically to go back to the policies of the Trump administration, the Remain in Mexico policy and, in fact, the wall itself. So that speaks for itself. But, you know, the idea with the other guest, the late Jean Kirkpatrick, she was in the Reagan administration, UN ambassador in New York, said, this is the Blame America crowd. All the world's problems are either, now it's either Donald Trump or America's all the problems. The world's problems are not America's problems. These are often economic refugees. There are also people coming in violently into the country. We have 162 terrorists that have been detained. And now there's a realization in the Democratic Party that it is going to cost them electorally. And that is why this administration is reversing course and implementing the Trump-era policies.
Joseph, let me ask you about someone who threw their hat into the ring, the presidential race, that of course being Robert Kennedy Jr. He announced an independent run for the White House, not doing so well on the Democratic side, so he decided to go as an independent. What do you make of his decision? Is he likely to play the role of a spoiler? And if so, who does he hurt more, Biden or Trump? Because there are a lot of Trump supporters who their beliefs kind of dovetail with Kennedy.
Well, I don't think, to answer the question shortly, I think that neither party wants to see him in the race, mainly because of just what you said. There's a lot of crossover voters who find it appealing to vote for an outsider, to vote for somebody who's raging against the system, and to vote for someone who pretty much aligns across the board. It's kind of a crazy quilt of his beliefs. So I think that neither Trump nor Biden want to see him enter. The question is whether or not he can garner enough campaign cash or recognition to make a debate. If he gets a debate, who's he going to debate with? How is he going to communicate his policies to the rest of the country so that he could become a spoiler? If you remember, Ralph Nader and the Green Party candidate whose name escapes me, they both had party infrastructure behind them, so they were able to get their message out. Kennedy, I don't know that he's got that. And I just want to address two quick things with that Adolfo said. First, I really don't know if Trump was behind the metro delay. I don't know who was behind the controls. I'm just asking the question, was he? Can we account for his whereabouts? We don't know. But secondly, I think that there is a legitimate point to be made about the fact that America, historically writ large, has had a hand. Now, are they directly to blame for violence in Central America? Probably not if you look closely enough. Have policies influenced what's gone on in Central America that's caused such economic distress and violence? Absolutely. You don't have to be a historian. All you have to do is Google and find out what the U.S. did in these countries that caused these mass migrations and this misery. And now we've got to deal with it. The chickens are coming home to roost.
I hope that's the Democrat message, that the reason we have a crisis is because America's at fault in these other places.
We've completely run out of time. We're going to have to do another show on the metro and how to fix it. That's another edition. That's going to do it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.